All right, let's get right into it. We're going to deconstruct a really fascinating story that's been built around NASA. Now, our goal here isn't to prove it right or wrong. Instead, we're going to look under the hood and see exactly how it's put together.
So this is the core claim of a pretty compelling theory out there. The idea is that NASA's programs aren't just about science. They secretly hide this whole spiritual framework that's based on mythology and even the occult.
So the real question is, how do you build a story like that? One that's so convincing? Well, we're going to pull back the curtain and really look at the techniques, the way facts, interpretations, and assumptions get woven together to create a really powerful narrative.
Okay, so here's what's really interesting. The most convincing stories, the ones that really stick, they always start with a foundation of truth. So let's look at the verifiable, hard facts that are used as the building blocks for this whole thing.
These are the undisputed, documented facts, things you can go look up right now. It's true that NASA's new lunar program is called Artemis and the spacecraft is named Orion. It is also a historical fact that Jack Parsons, a key rocket pioneer, was a known occultist. And yes, Buzz Aldrin was a 33rd-degree Freemason. Each one of these is verifiable, and they form this solid, credible bedrock for the story.
All right, so you've got these separate true ingredients. The crucial part, the real art of it, is how they get connected to create a story that suggests there's some kind of hidden, deliberate plan going on behind the scenes.
And this, right here, is a brilliant example of the first technique. Let's call it a linguistic leap. The story starts with something real. A 2019 NASA press release called Artemis, the Torch Bringer. Okay, then it connects that to an ancient Greek title for the goddess Artemis, which was phosphoros, meaning light bringer. And then comes the big jump. The Latin translation of phosphorus is Lucifer. So by hopping across languages and eras, a completely new, kind of sinister meaning is created. So the takeaway here? When you hear a connection that seems almost too perfect, it's worth asking if it relies on a similar chain of translation and reinterpretation.
Now, to make those big leaps feel solid and not like a stretch, narrators often use this really powerful tool, statements of confidence. Think of these as phrases that basically act as a substitute for actual proof.
You'll hear things like this all the time. It's unmistakable. This is used to insist that the connection between, say, the Artemis and Orion myths has to be intentional. It just shuts the door on any other possible explanation.
Or this one. You can't argue it. This kind of language, it kind of pressures you, the listener, to just accept the conclusion without asking for that direct proof. It presents an interpretation as a hard fact, and it makes you feel like you're missing something totally obvious if you happen to disagree.
Okay, next up, let's look at how storytelling itself is used to bridge these huge gaps, like the gap between one person's actions and the motives of an entire massive institution.
This is a perfect example. Step 1, you start with a fact. Buzz Aldrin was a Freemason. Step 2, you add another documented event. He did perform a personal observance on the moon. But then look at step 3. The conclusion is that, therefore, NASA's entire mission is secretly driven by occult rituals. You see that jump? The first 2 steps are factual, but the leap to that grand conclusion, well, it's never actually proven with any evidence. The story also often gives you a false choice. It basically says, look, it's either a massive, unbelievable coincidence or it's a deliberate plan. But that totally ignores the most obvious and maybe most boring third option, that we humans just reuse cool, culturally significant names all the time. Names like Apollo and Artemis sound epic and grand, which is kind of perfect for a space mission. No secret doctrine required.
And then, layered on top of all of this, you get the emotional language. This part is absolutely key. By using words like Luciferian, occult, or horrifying, and attaching them to the facts, the whole narrative just feels way more credible. Way more sinister. These words make the suggested connections feel so much more significant than they would on their own.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, this specific example, it actually reveals a universal pattern for how these compelling narratives get built. It's like a toolkit, and once you know what to look for, you'll start to see this pattern everywhere.
So here it is, the core formula. You start with real, verifiable facts. Then you add some creative connections, things like those linguistic leaps or big narrative jumps. And finally, you present the whole thing with unwavering, confident language. You do that, and you can build a story that feels incredibly real, whether it actually is or not.
Which really leaves us with this final, crucial question to think about. What is the difference between something that just sounds meaningful and something that's actually supported by evidence? Because once you really learn to spot that difference, that gap between a great story and verified proof, it's something you really can't unsee.